My name is Cecilia Aguillon. I am the Director of the Energy Transition Initiative at the Institute of the Americas in La Jolla, California. And no, you did not join the wrong webinar. Jeremy Martin, who sends his regards, by the way, is taking a break from hosting today, but he will return next week for another session of the ongoing series on critical minerals and energy transition. Today, though, we will focus on renewable energy markets in Argentina under the new administration of President Alberto Fernandez. Before the elections that occurred last October, there was a lot of excitement in the renewable investor community, marked by the success of 3 renewable energy auctions that not only were oversubscribed, but also resulted in power purchase agreement prices that were below expectations, even in the midst of a debt crisis, currency devaluation, and looming presidential elections. So it was a really exciting market for a lot of the investors. On the distributed generation side, the new regulations were put in place to promote energy efficiency and behind the meter renewable projects that not only promised to increase the uptake of renewables, but also contribute to economic development and the creation of new jobs at the community level. Now, Argentina is not only adjusting to a new administration, but also is dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, energy demand decline, and negative oil prices. So many wonder, how will the country emerge and what will happen to existing and new investments in renewable energy? To address these issues, we invited and have with us my esteemed colleague, Jorge Barrigh, who will share his perspective as someone very familiar with the energy finance in the Americas, and also follows the Argentinian market very closely. He is the chairman of the board of the Latin America and Caribbean Council on Renewable Energy, known as LAC-CORE, which is a membership organization dedicated to bringing renewable energy and energy efficiency to Latin America and the Caribbean. He is also founder and managing director of Barrigh Brufman Senior Advisories, a partnership that focuses on strengthening investment and fundraising for projects with climate and sustainability objectives. He is the regional transaction manager for the Private Finance Advisory Network. He is also senior advisor of climate finance and green financial instruments and innovation and entrepreneurship initiatives in the sustainability for the Centro Internacional de Formación de Autoridades y Líderes, part of the United Nations Center for Training and Research. He is a senior fellow of climate finance and energy for the World Watch Institute in Washington, D.C. Prior to this, Mr. Barrigh was the fund manager for the Clean Energy Finance Initiative for the Caribbean and Central America, a $10 million blended finance facility with the purpose of strengthening renewable energy, energy efficiency projects, and initiatives in the region, seeking equity or debt finance. Other recent clients include entities like CAF, IDB Invest, and GIZ, as well as private sector impact investment funds, local NGOs, and multinational firms active in the Caribbean, Central, and South America. Mr. Barrigh has lived and worked in Venezuela, Panama, Canada, Argentina, and the United States. So Jorge, welcome and thank you so much for joining us. But before I give you the mic, I just want to remind everyone that you are all muted. However, you may use the chat button that's at the bottom of your screen to type any questions, and you can see that there's already people using it. So Thank you again for joining us. And I promise Jeremy Martin is coming back next week. So for now, I welcome Jorge Barrigh.
Okay, am I on?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the Institute of the Americas. I'm a big fan of these webinars, as well as the work that they do, especially once they began to branch out significantly into the renewable energy space. Especially during these days, I think that it's worthwhile to stay on top of the extremely dynamic and many variables that we're facing in quite a few different markets. Thank you very much for the introduction. As Cecilia said, I think it's evident that I have a bias. Everybody has a bias. I have a bias. My bias is that of the investor perspective, that of the developer perspective. What are the conditions that work or have worked in the past? Perhaps we haven't imagined all of them. And what types of conditions need to be in place for there to be a successful transition? In this particular case, I have worked in the energy space for over 20 years, both traditional and renewable, as well as in energy efficiency projects. And in most countries in the Americas and in the Caribbean, I have some experience in. In fact, I'm currently speaking to you from Buenos Aires, where it's a beautiful fall day. But as you know, we can't really go out. I was taking a look at some and working on developing some proposals here, but then COVID happened. And so I've been spending more and more time here. And then it turns out that COVID is allowing me to spend even more time here. The importance of focusing on that bias is that I want to make sure you understand what my perspective is. I'm not going to get into the political weeds. I'm not going to get into the technical details necessarily, but from an outsider's perspective, what does it look like? Where are we at now, and what does it look like in the future? So I want to go ahead and share with you a couple of things before I get started. First, in terms of the ingredients that I see that are necessary, in fact, I'll move this. There you go. This is the agenda. We're going to be focusing a little bit and going back and forth. We're going to be discussing about where Renovar comes from, Renovar itself, and the renewables markets as they are now, conditions in the context until now, and then signals that we're seeing after any type of government transition. There are signals and messages and perhaps more clarity that we would like, but we have what we have. And that is especially true here in Argentina. And then because to be in this market, you have to be realistic, but you also have to be aspirational and be optimistic. I want to also want to note on what does it look like in the midterm, and what type of opportunities might there be between now and then. So, especially since from an investor perspective, money is shy. Argentina has a very almost a complete set of conditions. There's plenty of natural resources. There's a very high level of human capital here, with professionals here, whether lawyers or engineers, or finance individuals, or even in the regulatory sense, for people who know, especially on a technical front, people who know very much about the space. In addition to that, there has been a stable and growing demand up until recently, and there was a regulatory framing that allowed significant changes. And it's important to highlight that the laws that allowed for this to happen actually were passed at the end of 2015. So across several governments, is how you can actually tell the story of how Renovar came to be. Of course, there's other elements that are significant, along with the along with the growth and demand, or the stability of the economy. There's also the quality of the risk of the off-taker, the credit worthiness in general. And because again, I'm going to come back to this point, money is shy. So let me get back to the presentation. Let's see. Okay, so Renovar, we all know the story, or we're all familiar with the story. It is considered to be a very successful program. It actually has become a Harvard Business School study, and we understand that it began before it began in 2015, or probably even beforehand, because I have spoken to people who worked on the project, who worked on the law itself, and eventually it was passed at the end of 2015. But what that allowed then was for the creation, that was a regulatory framework that provided some mandatory targets, which we are aware of. It was important to have resource diversification, and I'll show you a graph that depicts quite well how well geographically the investments arrived in the country, as well as a diversification of the resources. In addition to that, some fiscal incentives, and then a really interesting and important innovation, especially from the perspective of investors, which was the Poder Guarantee. It should be highlighted that even as we go through the economic downturn that the country has experienced, in addition to now the COVID impact, the projects, Poder continues to work. And the projects that are operating and are billing continue to get paid for the energy that they deliver. This was not minor. And in fact, the mandatory target was 8% for 2017-18. We're at 2020 now, and 16% for 2021. Mandatory targets of renewable energy for the country, energy generation. And I'll show you some slides what the how April looked in terms of March and April looked in terms of what was the percentage that was being generated during those months. So it remains a success story, at least looking at it from the outside, and it certainly generated quite a few changes, which I think are which we can all agree are essentially here to stay. Let's see now. And so the program summary, I really love this slide. And I know it's in Spanish, but most of you will not have a problem taking a look at this. And this slide is updated on a regular basis. I had a version from January, and then a very good friend of mine shared this one, the March slide. And I did a comparison, and already in those 2 months, there are changes. So 156 projects between the ones in construction in commercial operation and construction are in place. $7.6 billion of total investment, 5.5 gigawatts of power that would be the capacity that would be increased. The jobs, because this is a significant aspect as well. The jobs were not just construction jobs, but there was also an emphasis to try to bring some manufacturing capacity to the country. And I believe that was also done in large measure. So there were 8,000 construction jobs created, but there are other types of jobs that were also created and remain. And the bulk of it won't surprise anybody who knows the country, but the bulk of these jobs would be in the wind-related projects. 77 more projects under construction, and 79 projects are currently generating. Different types of projects as well, and all of them operating at capacity. That is the last information that I have. But I want to highlight one other thing, and that is that it didn't stay. This advance that allowed for the creation of Renovar then moved on, because there was There was 3 auctions that were successful, and in addition to that, there was a new law also for distributed generation, and that was a law that was passed in 2017, and I believe in 2018 it was regulated, which means that some of the rules were added to it, and that's important to highlight. Well, I know about that because some of the initiatives that I would have been taking a look at were more related with distributed generation. In addition to that, the Mater commercial projects also came into the grid, and that became another way forward. And so there were several avenues in which renewable energy was grabbing hold in a way that is not insignificant, especially for a country that before, I would say 2014, they had made some efforts, but at the time, really, the investment conditions weren't all the conditions. I shouldn't just say the investment conditions. All the conditions were not in place necessarily, and so that's an accurate question about what happens now that there's been another shift. And so this is what I was discussing, what I was referencing. Renewable generation as a percentage of demand by type. This is from CAMESA. I should say that it's a very easy to navigate tool, and very much appreciate the transparency and how it's all published the way that it is, and it's updated consistently and constantly. As a percentage of demand by type in March, we see that the participation was 8%, which is already much higher than it was in March. And the bulk of this is in wind generation, biomass, and hydropower. So if we go on to the next slide, and we see in April, on this particular date, the percentage of renewables was nearly 14%. So renewables continue to generate, renewables continue to deliver, and I believe we are on track, or we remain on track, to meet some of those objectives that were laid out by the Renovar program. So one of the questions that I've sometimes been asked, since I've been coming here fairly frequently and spent some time here, is whether, what these changes spell, the changes in government, the macroeconomic difficulties, and now COVID, whether that's, and also the collapse of the oil prices, which in the past has meant that renewables no longer have as strong a business case. But I think that we're living in a different world, and this 8 or 13% of the demand being met by renewables is something that is very significant, and it's something that remains an established part of the infrastructure. There are issues related to the infrastructure which do limit growth, but that's something else that we're going to be discussing. And so once again, I very much like this graph, because it displays where it is that most of the investments have been taking place. And as you can see, the South predictably and the central part of the country predictably are mostly focusing on wind. The wind resource in Argentina is, I believe, second to none. I have had the privilege of traveling down in the Patagonia and seen some of these projects operate. And I've spoken to asset owners, wind asset owners, that have operating assets as well. And without question, this is a resource that is very, very well taken advantage of. While in the north, we focus a little bit more on solar and on biomass. And then the closer you get to the mountains, also predictably, you take advantage of the hydro resource. And so this is where we are. A significant shift began in 2015, probably prior to that, because usually policy-related initiatives take some time to negotiate, to create some consensus, and be able to pass the laws. The next stage was the creation of this program and the opening up to investment and opportunity. That opportunity has been well taken advantage of, and now we're heading into another stage. And this is not without even discussing COVID yet. There were changes that were there were changes that were evident. First one, and it's evident, is that the government changed. And I should do a little parentheses here. From the middle of 2019, probably before that, we had already been experiencing in this country an economic a reduction of activities, and there were some concerns that were already in place. And I experienced this myself because I started to work with some hydro projects that already had established PPAs with Renovar, and we were trying to, with a partner, find an investor. And I can tell you that as of more or less May, June of last year, it was beginning to get a little bit difficult to find an investor. Even though the project, from a technical perspective, was strong, from a regulatory perspective was strong, from the PPA, the off-taker, everything was strong. There was a wait-and-see attitude. We were already experiencing a wait-and-see attitude, and so now, and in addition, and so after that, there was a change in government, right? And that generated a mandate. This new government has assumed its role, and they've received a mandate for change. And that mandate for change is one that they've taken very seriously. And so their focus as well is a little bit different. They also inherited a situation that was admittedly complex. So in addition to currency controls, which are now in place, that wasn't in place before, in addition to a reduction of demand, a reduction of economic activity, there were in addition to some other elements that were in play. Well, a tariff freeze as well was a new policy that was implemented. The focus, the area of focus, became a little bit different, and in addition to that, there was a shift in the authorities, but also in the direction of the renewable energy secretariat or subsecretariat at the time. As of the beginning of this month, we have a new director, Mr. Guillermo Martin, and since his arrival, there have been quite a few movements or a bit of news related to the signals that it's sending to the industry. But without question, the new government arrived, and it's set a different stage. In addition to that, they were dealing already with well, I didn't even mention it, but it's extremely significant in this country, the discussion of the debt, the sovereign debt issue, both with the IMF and also with the bondholders, and that's an ongoing negotiation at this stage. And so there's been a bit of a pause and a wait and see attitude that actually began in 2019, as I shared with you, up until now. There's a wait and see attitude, and we're beginning to see some decisions. We're beginning to see some movement, because there are projects that, for a variety of reasons, had to stop. They couldn't get financing, like the ones I mentioned, the hydro projects I mentioned. In addition to that, well, now we're dealing with COVID, and so the borders have closed. There was a quarantine in place, but energy projects can continue, and we have this confluence of activities, this confluence of conditions that would lead you to think well, the conditions aren't in place at this particular point. And so debt, currency, inflation, high unemployment, high expectations also from the people who elected from the country that elected this new government. And now we face COVID-19. And COVID-19 has led to an additional set of circumstances which are complicated. The energy demand reductions I want to highlight an article that will probably be published soon if it hasn't been published. And it was done by the Institute of the Americas regarding, and to try to answer the question, how much of the demand reduction is related to the stoppage. And it turns out that according to this analysis, it's almost about 48% of the demand reduction from March to April is related to that. The global collapse of oil and prices, both countries were focusing on the importance of oil and gas for their continued economic growth. At this point, that doesn't exist as much anymore. In fact, it doesn't. The collapse of commodity prices as well. All of that adds up to a very difficult macroeconomic condition. This is a slide on the reduction of demand. This also came from Camesa, and they were indicating a 15% reduction of demand in on one day on April 13th. And then this slide is the one that I wanted to spend a little time on, because that is a slide that comes from that study that I mentioned. This study that was published by an article that was published by the Institute of the Americas, is probably the most complete one that I've seen, because you see, Argentina's summers are very, very warm. The temperature has changed a little bit. In addition to that, there was an economic slowdown. And in addition to that, we have the impact of COVID, which meant that manufacturing came down significantly. Oil, gas, and mining came down. And then food and retail sales came down as well. So the impact of COVID is not immaterial. And so what does it generate beyond? Well, Argentina is still on quarantine. Slowly, it's opening different sectors. Its borders are closed for the time being, at least until May 10th. You may have all seen that there are no commercial flights. Should be no commercial flights until September 2nd, both internal, domestic, and also international, but that could change. One thing that I have learned from working so much in the Americas and a bit in Africa is that these types of things can change, and sometimes relatively rapidly, depending on the change of conditions. But this reduction in demand is not minor, and it generates a whole series of other questions, right? Because you're delivering less power, and perhaps you have to face some fines because you're delivering less power. Or it has to factor into the negotiations with projects that haven't closed financing or have not concluded construction right now, because your demand has dropped as much as it has. And as it comes back up, as the economy is opened up and it ramps up after, hopefully we get past COVID, then you're still dealing with what is now a global recession. Well, and this is a summary of economic indicators. I pulled this out of a report from a French bank. They were using IMF figures. They were up through March. It's no surprise that all over the world, the economic indicators have shown a downturn, including some of the strongest economies, like the European economies, the Japanese, United States. So that is a bit predictable. But it also is one of the ingredients of the conditions that I was describing at the beginning. So um, it's a very dynamic situation. And it would seem, and in fact, friends of mine warned me that perhaps it was a bit negative, a bit of a negative outlook. And I want to caution against that, um, because there are things that are facts, and the COVID is a fact, and the impact of COVID due to government or reactions to COVID here and elsewhere is a fact. We're all dealing with that. That's one thing. The second thing is that the macroeconomic difficulties, well, the economic difficulties are also a fact. But there are some elements that are significant within that context. For example, an agreement with the IMF, an agreement with the private bondholders would reduce the weight of that fact, of that difficult fact, going forward, would be able to free the economy a little bit from some of those burdens or provided some breathing space, for instance. Would also probably reduce the prospect of inflation. Inflation is already high, but would reduce the prospect of inflation. And the government's focus on customers, on the client itself, the relief that they're providing to residential customers primarily, which is not uncommon for the region. All over the region, we're seeing these types of policies providing relief to the client, to the residential customers, would probably also not need to be implemented as harshly as they are. And in terms of the energy sector in general, the country understands, and this government, like other governments, understands that it is a critical vector for growth, regardless of what model you choose to follow. It's a critical vector for growth. And it's important to understand that both the last administration and this administration is extremely clear that there are some limitations, important bottlenecks in transmission and distribution. You should also be aware that there are projects that are still receiving investment. There are projects that are attracting investment. These are Chinese projects by and large generation projects, hydro projects, for instance. But they too face the need to have a more robust and a more robust transmission system. This administration, from what I have been told, sees that as a significant opportunity and perhaps provides the pause necessary or the shift in focus necessary to strengthen that part of the infrastructure in order for more generation to be connected to the grid, including eventually renewables. Could there be more auctions? At this stage, I see it. I see it. I don't see it. I don't see the case very clearly for additional auctions the way that they had been done before. But I can anticipate that auctions will come back eventually. And the opportunities lie in the distributed generation market. I know that for a fact because I'm looking at some projects that are focusing on distributed generation. Also, a sector focus. 54% of Argentina's export earnings come from the agriculture sector. Are there energy efficiency opportunities there? Are there opportunities to integrate renewable energy there as part of industry? The answer clearly is yes. There are projects that are taking a look at that right now, but it's a bit of a shift. And the MATER continues to operate, continues to work. I hate to use a term like the genie is out of the bottle, but for Argentina, the work that was accomplished in the past from 2015 up until now in the renewable energy space is one that is significant, that was groundbreaking, and that is going to be part of the foundation for the next few stages after COVID and after several of the significant macroeconomic issues that I did reference, like the debt negotiations, are addressed, and the management of the global recession. That's where I am taking a look at the opportunities right now. So for me, the picture, well, as I said from the beginning, my focus is what do the conditions look like? Where do I see the opportunity? What kind of project developer with what kind of project developer do I want to focus on? Is there an opening if there are some areas of opportunity that seem closed? And what types of signals are important and necessary? And this, I'm going to end on this point, because there is now leadership. I don't know how to frame it, but there had been a person who was working in renewable energy, in the renewable energies under the Secretariat before. But has now been a formal designation, and there is a person who's coming from the energy industry, I think from wind, if I know correctly. And so this person now is the director of it's a director of renewable energies, and we're going to begin to see there's some questions related to how to manage projects that haven't closed, how to haven't closed financing, haven't started up their COD date, they haven't started the operations or the delivery of power, and other projects that haven't closed financing. I see a little bit here, a question from Jeremy. Yeah, this is about transmission. Yeah, I'm going to highlight that again. I thought I had mentioned it already, but I think I'm going to highlight it again. Both the prior government and this government a bit more focus on that. There are some significant bottlenecks in transmission and high tension transmission. In fact, during one of my trips last year, we had a 4-country outage. And it was related to, there was also a fantastic article on that. And I think IOA published it, or somebody from IOA published it too, about the causes, what caused that transmission failure. And part of it was related to the fact that there was some maintenance that had been taking place. And so some of the backup lines weren't available. And then you had some triggers that you had an event that triggered a bit of a disconnection, an outage. And that was one example of a problem that has been manifested recently. But this government understands, and in fact, I'm going to share this other bit. This government has identified that in transmission and distribution, there are so many losses and inefficiencies that they want to focus on, that they could reduce losses significantly, and it could amount to as much as a 30 megawatt new plant addition or something like that, perhaps higher, perhaps 300 megawatt. I don't remember the figure exactly. But between that and baseload, distributed generation, the commercial market and the sector market, there's still a fair amount to do. And I think at this stage, like the rest of the world, we're just going to have to, it's patient capital here. Probably in the midterm is where we can see more opportunities in a clearer fashion. I think I want to stop here, because obviously there's a lot to say, but I want to give a little bit of opportunity for some questions. I don't know, Cecilia, does that make sense?
Thank you so much, Jorge. Yes. So there are some questions I have during your presentation. Yeah, thank you for addressing Jeremy's question there. But my question on that point is, because everybody gets excited about renewables and they're so cheap, and there is issues with transmission and distribution, and with Argentina, I think they're looking at what happened in Chile and other places. They're thinking, oh, we don't want that to happen. So how would you avert that? I mean, like, where would the investments come from? Private, public? How would you address that infrastructure challenge?
I think there is no question. I think there is no question that the government has to take a lead, and there has to be some multilateral support for that. Because right now, I don't see private sector diving in as a lead investor in some of these transmission initiatives. And usually, the government takes the lead in these, and usually it's multilaterals like the World Bank or CAF in this particular case probably would be stepping in to provide some financing, and then they might syndicate the opportunity. And well, thinking out loud, there's probably an opportunity here for, especially if it's focusing on strengthening the renewables grid, there's probably an opportunity for some type of thematic bond, but it would need to be backed up by a multilateral.
Okay.
So that's how I would expect that to happen. The government taking the lead with some multilateral backing. Let me address a question that I just saw here. Um, yeah, there's a question about PPAs. That PPAs would be that the ones that were signed would be paid in pesos and not in dollars. That they would be somehow converted. I have heard that rumor several times. I have asked that question several times. My, to the best of my knowledge, and please understand that this is a very dynamic situation, and everybody has an opinion. Uh, but to the best of my knowledge, projects that have been signed already and that are already operating and are being paid, and FODER is backing them up. And so, to my understanding, there is no intention or no concern on that front at this stage. That's what I would say. Future contracts, well, I think you have several hurdles to go through first. First of all, with the drop in demand, are those projects important, critical, necessary as far as the new authorities are concerned? How do they jive? How do they paginate, I should say, with their areas of focus right now? um, Especially dealing with COVID. How does it strengthen the government's focus on the domestic markets? That's a question. I know because it's been in the news that 17 projects or 20 projects that already had PPAs, they are in negotiations with the government. Whether they go forward, whether they don't go forward, how that is managed, I think it's going to be treated on a case by case basis. In addition to that, and this is something else that I should mention, there there's news every single day um, in the space, and we're beginning to get more news because more decisions are being made. But there's initiatives even to increase some of the taxes for the projects that are currently operating right now, especially the wind projects down south. There's a lot of rumor. There's a lot of speculation. What that shows is that the market is looking for strong signals. Strong signals. The direction that the government chooses to take is one thing, but the signals for the projects that are already operating, the signals for the projects that have already advanced a fair amount, that are already in construction, or that already have PPAs, they need to be clarified. They need to be addressed, even if what we're really facing is a bit of a pause on the traditional development of renewables, meaning that the traditional auctions that we were used to that were successful under the Renewable program, if the shift is in a different direction, even so, I think that signal would be helpful to the industry at the very least.
Okay. Thank you. So staying on the auction part, and assuming that there is no change, do you think that that the government, as the economy restarts and renewables are a lot cheaper in some cases, do you think that that would motivate investors? And I'm also thinking about the investors because we're talking about patient investing. Um, I was surprised that the response of the auctions in the last 3-4 years in an economy like that, and I thought, well, it's going to be very difficult. The PPAs are going to be high, but it seemed like investors really like the market. I mean, like they really seem to be patient. So will they be patient? Will they? Is there hope that once you get restarted, should not be a change in the U.S. dollar denomination, or do you think that if there is a change, they will run away?
It's hard to speculate because I said at the beginning money is shy, but money looks for more money too.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always an opportunity. And in Spanish, we have this saying about fishing in troubled waters, right? And what we call río revuelto.
Mm-hmm.
And the opportunities, I think there will still be opportunities. It's just, and will the capital be patient? I think some capital will be patient. In addition to that, the prospects. This is a middle income economy that has gone through. They would probably in Argentina. I have friends who say to me, "We wish we didn't have so much experience with economic crisis." But this is a resilient country. It's a country that has been through many, many of these challenges. It's not the only country that has defaulted, but it has happened a few times here, and that has generated other issues. So, and yet you saw that a few conditions changed, and from a period of 2016 to through 2019, 2020, you're still seeing more of these investments coming online. So I
Mm-hmm.
would say that the opportunities are not going to go away. That there's probably going to have to be a refocusing because government sets policy and there's a direction and a series of priorities that they have. Part of which I should add are part of the mandate that elected them, right? So they're just addressing their mandate. And how does energy fit into that vision of country or of government that they have? In addition to then, how does renewable energy fit into that vision? I think that those are the questions there's a fair amount of uncertainty about. Crystal balling is hard, um, but I would say that the opportunities would still be in place. The question about there's two the question about PPAs being in pesos rather than dollars. Well, it depends, right? It depends what that means. I've also learned that from working all over the region. It sounds pretty black and white. Excuse me. Okay, it sounds pretty black and white, but there have been special regimes that have created under regulations that would allow, for instance, a some type of convertibility, perhaps not at at the unofficial market rate, but some type of weighted average. Who knows? Right now, that's all speculative. Would that drive away investors? That would drive away some investors without question. I have had many resounding no's to projects that I've presented, just focusing on that. Absolutely. But all investors? No, I think that there's still going to be an opportunity. And I don't think renewables are going away anytime soon. I think that it has worked out well for the country. It has worked out well for the government and for the country, for the people. And now
Awesome.
with distributed generation, I think that that's just following a global trend towards towards providing a more customized experience, whether it's for industrial sectors or the agriculture sector or even at the residential level. Right now, there are several projects that are relatively small, that are more social and community based projects in areas that in the past haven't, they have access to power, but it has been unreliable and the like. So I still see opportunities. There was a question, sorry, on geothermal energy. And I think that there is a geothermal energy. There is an opportunity for geothermal energy. Um, uh, but I think that I don't. I know Chile is taking advantage of that. It's only logical Argentina would as well. I did read geothermal projects in El Salvador, so I know how efficient they can be and how good they can be for base load. But I have no experience here in Argentina with that. Thank you very much, Fernando. Sorry, Cecilia. I just
Go
saw
ahead.
that Fernando Rodriguez shared an important element here, which is that's right. Argentina is part is very well connected to its neighboring countries, and is both buying and selling power on a regular basis. And that is a way that also, but in addition to increasing regional integration and broadening the market, as it were, um, it has been happening. Argentina is already selling energy to other countries, and it's buying energy from other countries on a daily basis. Actually, I'm going to once again mention the Camesa instruments, because one of those pages within the Camesa website will tell you how much power has been sold, how much power has come in from different countries.
Awesome. So I have one last question for you on distributed
Yeah,
generation.
yeah.
Well, there's been it's a lot of subsidies on residential mostly. So where do you see, because distributed generation is good, like for like the provinces and for local communities, obviously, for job development and things like that. So given that people are now not, if you cannot pay, you don't pay, you don't get disconnected. Do you see the market chilling, or do you see it, as the economy opens, then things will open up for that market as well?
I don't see a way that they can't open up. Regardless of what your ideology is or your political bias is or what the priorities are at the time, at some point the emergency ends, and people need to work, and
Mm-hmm.
power will be needed, and and things will begin to level out. In some countries, it will take longer than others, admittedly. But I do see what I'm seeing in terms of distributed generation right now are three types of projects. One, sector based. And in this particular case, is how to integrate renewable energy and energy efficiency within relatively strong industries. In this particular case, I'm talking about agriculture, where
Mm-hmm.
really it's where there's opportunities, right? The other one is related to behind the meter, large industrial or commercial type of initiatives. Those are not going to go away. Those will not change. I think the opportunities are still going to be there, and I know that project developers are looking at those types of projects right now. In addition to that, remember, there is now manufacturing capacity in the country, in Argentina, and
Mm-hmm.
so that is going to provide, should provide, an additional vector of development. And finally, community. This government is very much focused on the majority's needs, right? Let's just frame it that way. Uh, and in the rural areas, or even within large cities, there are initiatives underway to try to take advantage of distributed generation, so that, and in one way, in one fashion, in one way to approach this, sorry, is to probably do a mini grid inside and you create a community-based a social power company, and
Mm-hmm.
that I've seen initiatives such as those within large metropolitan areas, including Buenos Aires. It's different. It's not easy. Social projects are never easy. It takes longer, and from a traditional perspective, community power projects are difficult, are more difficult to measure. But initiatives like those are underway. In addition to that, in rural areas, parts of this country have some pockets of poverty that are significant in rural areas. Um, I've also seen initiatives that are focusing on integrating renewable energies, and from a community perspective there as well. And the financing there is a mixture. It's a more
Mm-hmm.
of a blended approach. Grants, some really patient capital, and probably a multilateral, something along those lines. Opportunities in renewables will continue, I guess is what I'm trying to
Wow.
say, in many different ways. Conditions are different because the life has changed. That's
Mm-hmm.
before COVID. Add COVID to it, and life changed. Um,
Yep.
but there's still reason to celebrate, not celebrate, but really acknowledge the hard work that allowed the country to make the leaps that it did. thus far in renewable energy space, and then that's not going away. And B, it's part of the mix now. When you're 13, 14% of demand, that is not insignificant. And if one of the constraints is transmission and distribution, and this government has chosen to make it a priority, I think that there are some conditions that are taking hold that allows us to have not a sanguine view, not too optimistic, not wishful thinking, but understanding the realities of life and the realities of change, still remain optimistic.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jorge. It's been really kind of exciting, given the situation, to see that there is a silver lining, and that Argentina is not only going to come back, but it will come back strong in the market, for the market. And with that, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. And I wanted to remind you that next week at this time, May 7th, there's going to be another webinar on the managing critical mineral supply chain risks. And it's going to be hosted by yours truly, well, not me, but Jeremy Martin. And also, don't forget to sign up to register for the La Jolla Energy Conference, May 18th through 22nd. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day and stay safe and be healthy.
Thank you.